City Journal podcast. I'm your host, Charles Fain Lehman, a fellow at the Manhattan Institute and senior editor of City Journal. Joining me this week on my panel are Ilya Shapiro, all things legal at the Manhattan Institute, Daniel Martino, all things immigration at the Manhattan Institute, and Renu Mukherjee, some, indeed many things educational at the Manhattan Institute. Thanks everybody for hopping on.
And we have to congratulate Renu. She's a newlywed now.
We do.
I don't know why she's not off on some beach, sipping margaritas or pina coladas, but here she is with us.
Instead, she decided to do the City Journal podcast, which is a honeymoon in and of itself.
How good this podcast is.
Exactly.
There is nothing more blissful than the City Journal podcast.
Precisely. That's what everyone's going for. All right. I want to take us into the news of the day, and actually the news of yesterday, when the Supreme Court heard oral arguments in the St. Isidore case, which is asking whether or not the state of Oklahoma violated the First Amendment by denying a religious school access to its charter school system. Early reporting suggests that this is going to be a win for the school and for religious liberty more generally, but you can never really read the tea leaves in these things. So Ilya, I want to go to you first as our guy for all things legal. Tell us a little bit more about the case. I know you filed an amicus brief in the case, so tell us how A, what's going on, and B, how you thought about it and your team thought about it.
Right. I'll get to our brief and how that fits in, but most states in the country, I think we're up to 46, have provisions for charter schools, which are publicly funded but independently run. And there's a whole panoply of charter schools. Some that focus on, having uniforms and more discipline. Some classical education. Some LGBTQ friendly. Some, like in Oklahoma, are run by Native Americans and, more of those traditions. So for the first time anywhere in the country, a religious school accepted terms, accepted the regulations, the oversight, the curriculum oversight, and what have you, from the Catholic Diocese in Oklahoma. And the board, the charter school board, approved their application to run a charter school. The Attorney General blocked it, however, and said that it would constitute an establishment of religion, that Oklahoma would be publicly funding religious education. So the question is this indeed an Establishment Clause violation? Is it the public funding of religious education? Or if this school is denied, and this is where the Manhattan Institute filed our brief, would it be disqualifying an entity simply because of its religious status? And there is some tension there because charter schools are a relatively new thing. I don't mean, in the last few years, but, it used to be that there were private schools and there were public government schools, and that's it. And there's this charter school. What is it? And this is what the justices were debating. Is it a state actor? Is it a government entity? Is it direct public funding of religion? Or is it like another series of cases that have said in the last decade, where the Supreme Court has said, if you have a generally applicable neutral public program, you can't disqualify an entity from its benefits simply because of its religious status.
That's the question I have on this case, Ilya. What's the difference between establishing a charter school and getting government money and receiving a school voucher for your kid to send him to a Catholic school?
There's levels of parental choice. So here it's not that each parent gets a certain amount of money as provided by a statutory formula or from a scholarship organization. That's a further step removed from any public funding that gets a tax write-off or something. Here it's funding per pupil, the same formula that any traditional public government school gets. And anyone is welcome to attend this school, but it's not that the parent has a voucher or a tax scholarship or something like that and takes it to the school.
And Ilya, isn't that distinction precisely why some of the justices, including Chief Justice Roberts, was a bit skeptical in comparing, at least in oral argument yesterday, the case of St. Isidore to the Trinity Lutheran trilogy, saying that it seems as though there's a higher degree of involvement. What do you make of that?
And
that's exactly right.
What's Trinity Lutheran for those? Not
right,
yeah,
right. So Trinity
know.
Lutheran is one of the leading cases on point. I sort of alluded to this in the recent. There's a recent Trinity, as it were, of cases. 3 cases. Trinity Lutheran was about playground resurfacing, and all of these in Missouri, and all of these organizations, entities, locations qualified for state playground resurfacing grants, except for the playground that was attached to a church, which otherwise qualified, but simply because it was religious was disqualified. And the Supreme Court said, no, that's inappropriate. We're not, buying Bibles for the church. We're doing playground resurfacing. You can't discriminate against it based on its status. Another case, Carson versus Macon, where in Maine, if there's big rural state, if there's no high school in your district, you can take the same amount of money the state would otherwise spend on your kids' education and take it to any high school, private, public, somewhere else in the state, what have you, Andover and Deerfield and what have you. But what about a religious school? And here again, the Supreme Court said, look, you're saying they can take this anywhere except religious schools. That's inappropriate. So here it's a closer case because, again, as has now gotten out as in our discussion here, it's a direct public funding of a religious institution, but one that is independently run. It's not that the state is, it's kind of a hybrid or somewhere in the middle. So where do you draw that line? And you're right to pick up on Chief Justice Roberts. He is the key here. Amy Coney Barrett is recused because she had been involved with the Notre Dame Law School clinic that brought the case, that organized, that has been advising the St. Isidore. So there's 8 justices. The 3 Democratic appointed ones are clearly against the school. The other 4 seem to be leaning quite strongly to allow this, and Chief Justice Roberts is the deciding vote. If it ends up 4-4, there will be no opinion from the Supreme Court, and the Oklahoma Supreme Court's opinion affirming the denial of the charter status to the religious school will remain.
Okay. Now, several questions on this. Well, 2. Why is the Oklahoma Attorney General even doing this? Like, is this a Republican state? What is going on here? Like, do they hate Catholics now? Are there other religions establishing public charter schools? And then the other thing, it seems to me that the key difference here is that this is a charter school, meaning the kids could go to a traditional public school if they wanted. So this is just additional choice, and it's open to any and should be open, at least how I perceive it, to any religions. Because if you can establish, a gay public charter school, you need to be able to establish a Catholic public charter school.
The Oklahoma politics are interesting, and I know a little bit about this because for the last 12 years or so, I've been going every summer to do a Supreme Court roundup for the Federalist Society chapters in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. In fact, I just yesterday booked my plane tickets for the next trip. It's going to be the second week of July. And yes, it's a Republican Attorney General, but sort of a self-funding squish. So there was a previous Attorney General. Scott Pruitt was the longtime Attorney General. He joined the first Trump administration. There was a scramble, some dominoes, some internal politics. Then there was a primary. Anyway, all of this weird local, in-state politics in a relatively small state in terms of population. And so this guy comes who's a Republican, because you have to be a Republican to be successful statewide in Oklahoma. But he doesn't, he's not aligned with the conservative legal movement, let's say.
I want to take Ilya off the hot seat and ask a little bit about the sort of broader charter school implications here, because my intuition, and I think this is true of a lot of us, is it's good to expand choice, it's good to expand religious liberty. But there's an interesting argument from a friend of City Journal, George Will, in the Washington Post a little bit before the case, in which he pointed out that there's a real risk of this sort of stalling the charter school movement because it sort of introduces pre-existing cultural tensions around the role of religion in the public sphere, that in some senses, for those of us who want to see charter schools keep expanding, you risk you risk the sort of bringing that cultural baggage into what is otherwise a broadly popular movement. So Renu, Daniel, I'm curious what you make of that view. Do you think is the better the argument, or is it should we be leaning into the all options for charter schools?
That the case with St. Isidore presents the future of charter schools. But the argument that you just brought up, Charles, is interesting because our colleague Nicole Stell-Garnett, who's written extensively on this issue and this case specifically has been involved, she had a piece in City Journal, perhaps maybe a year or even longer ago at this point, where she had a sentence in which she threw the idea that if the court allows St. Isidore to go forward and you open the door, you crack the window to religious charter schools, then, this would mean that you'd allow charter schools for other faiths as well, such as, for example, Islam. And that had caused, some consternation among perhaps, conservatives and whatnot. With respect to charter schools, it was just one sentence, but sort of the response to that idea going out there was interesting. So I think to your, point referencing this Washington Post piece, like, yes, this is the future. But at the same time, it opens the door to you're not just going to have then, Catholic charter schools or of other denominations of Christianity. You're going to allow for perhaps Hindu charter schools, Islamic charter schools, and that definitely might bring some of the culture war tension into this issue.
So I think the issue here is they don't have school vouchers. This is why there's even an attempt to open a public charter school that is Catholic, because in other places they would prefer to be private because that gives them even more control. So I think the solution politically to this is that we need to enact full school choice in every state so that you can take your school dollars with even more independence from the government to your Hindu school. I have no problem with schools of other religions. I think it's great. In fact, I view that, as a Catholic, I view a threat to Catholicism more the atheistic secularist state than other faiths. So in my opinion, it's always a positive if the children of religious families in the U.S. can, maintain religious values. And I also think Catholic education tends to be superior. And even people of other faiths go to Catholic schools because of how good it is.
I mean, I'm a Hindu and I'm fully Catholic educated.
And I know you went to Catholic school.
It's very American. I wanna, the other angle on this that's very interesting to me is that, as we alluded to earlier, there's sort of this line of cases where the court has tried as much as possible to create carve-outs for religious liberty. And in some senses, this has created like comedy on the court, where they're just like, we wanna preserve people's right to be left alone in their religious faith, and that sort of joins the right flank of the court with its sort of more religious liberty concerns to the left flank of the court with its more civil libertarian concerns. But I think we're now sort of getting into these thornier questions. So there's this case, there's the local opt-out case in Montgomery County that got heard, I think, earlier, I guess now last month. So I wonder if that,
We filed there as well. Yeah,
yeah,
that's an interesting case where the various religious parents said that we had been getting an opt out, and then the school said, well, too many students were opting out of these gender identity related books, and so we had
Maybe
to
because
kill
nobody
the
wants
opt-out.
it.
yeah. So let me just ask, and we'll move on. But do people are people worried about the sort of broader religious freedom project? Are we going in the right direction? Is there a risk of this becoming more controversial? Are they going to be able to stay the course?
Well, look, this raises, at a certain point there is a tension between religious free exercise and the Establishment Clause, because as if you're going to have one size fits all government schools, there have to be decisions made on curriculum, on values, what is the lowest common denominator or just common denominator. So as Daniel said, the optimal solution is not to step on anybody's toes and let them choose what kind of education they have. And sure, you can still have state supervision to make sure they're not abusing kids, to make sure kids are actually learning math rather than interpretive dance 24/7. Things like that. But beyond those basic kind of standards, it would be, I think we're much past. Just like educators, innovators are rethinking the model from the 19th century Little Red Schoolhouse farm kids style of education, where everyone sits in the same place for certain blocks and things like that. We need to rethink the funding structures and the governance mechanisms.
Renu, where do you fit in on the? I mean, I suspect you're sympathetic to the school choice argument. I'm curious about where you see it going from here.
Very sympathetic, as you know. And Charles, I echo everything Ilya said. I also want to point out something really like a really great, I refer to it as, excuse me, an intelligent academic troll at the end of Ilya's, on behalf of MI's amicus brief, in which, he brings up a number of other institutions that provide services to the public that are not necessarily considered, these organizations aren't considered, arms of the state, but these are religious organizations, such as running shelters, for example. A lot of religious organizations are the backbone of that, and he makes that argument. So I think, this is a case in which you have uh, you have this, institution that has this religious background, but that doesn't automatically mean, it's an arm of the state simply because it's providing education, which is, a very broad, uh, a very broad, you know, thing that the state does. It's perhaps a bit too broad.
At base, why to me it doesn't seem like an establishment of religion is because nobody is being forced to go to this school. And it even came up during argument.
Exactly.
What if the religious school was the only one in the district, which is kind of far fetched because there typically would be a traditional public government school, unless we go to a full school choice system, in which case it would be a different world altogether. But the lawyer for Saint Isidore said, well, that would be present different sorts of issues and far afield from what we're doing now.
All right. All right, I want to take us out. So before we do that, one sentence answer. Who do you think is going to prevail in the case? We'll leave Ilya's surprise for the end. So Dan, we'll start with you. Is it San Isidore or Oklahoma?
I'm gonna be a pessimist it's gonna be a 4-4, and I hate it because I want the school to win.
Okay. Renu?
So a pessimist, I'm going to say Oklahoma because of some comments made by the Chief Justice yesterday.
Ilya?
Well,
Ilya,
You think
save
it's
us.
gonna be 5-3 in favor of the
Sorry,
school or
5-3.
4-4?
Yes,
Oh, you're gonna
5-3. But I'm
5-3.
a
Okay.
pessimist just like you here.
Okay, it's even more than me.
I think John Roberts is going to say going to school is a tax, and therefore you.
For
well,
context, for the people who don't understand it, read the Obamacare decisions. and all
that's
that.
a deep cut or a not so deep cut, depending on how closely you follow the court. Going back to the Obamacare litigation, but look, if it ends up 4-4, which I would say is I'm maybe 55% confidence in a 4-4, and I'll blame our colleague Nicole Garnett for being too good friends with Amy Coney Barrett and therefore forcing her recusal.
All right. I'm going to say it's going to be 8-0 because everyone will be persuaded by the Manhattan Institute's amicus brief to vote our way. All right, let's move on to talking about our sometime friend, sometime foe to the north, Canada. Earlier this week, Canadians delivered a stunning rebuke to both the Canadian Conservative Party and also, more importantly, to us Americans, Donald Trump, when they returned the Liberal Party to another term in power under the leadership of Prime Minister Mark Carney. That's a shocking about face. Previously, we expected the Conservatives to rout the opposition because of the unpopularity of the prior Trudeau government. But I'm curious about sort of how we think about this, both in the American context, politics context, and in the broader shape of the international right. Daniel, you said you were disappointed in the outcome when we were emailing about this. What are your thoughts?
Why don't we ask Ilya first, since he's the
That's
Canadian
true.
here?
I don't want to make him the token Canadian. He's American to us.
Well, I go both ways on the 49th parallel. I actually voted in this election.
Good.
My only remaining tie to Canada is I still have the passport, and I cheer for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But that's about it. But the way these things work, for purposes of Canadian elections, I'm a permanent expat, and I will forever be voting in the district where my dad lived, which is where I lived when I was in high school. Which is in North York, which is in Toronto, north of downtown, but it's a swing district. This was one of the latest ones that was called. I think it was ultimately won by the Liberal by 1%, but it's a swing district, or riding as they call them in Canada, and it was evocative of what happened on a broader scale. The Conservative Party actually got its highest share of the popular vote since 1988. The problem is this was happening at the same time as the Socialist Party, the New Democratic Party, was collapsing. And so all of the non-conservative vote, or most of the non-conservative vote, consolidated in the Liberals. And so they were able to score their fourth consecutive election win, albeit in the minority. They did not get a majority of the seats in Parliament. Even though this was a change election, the Liberals managed to win their fourth straight. In large part, for two reasons. First, the heavily unpopular Justin Trudeau resigned and replaced by a very different person. If Trudeau is kind of woke, post-nationalism, all this weird stuff, Mark Carney is a central banker technocrat who's never been a politician before, this kind of bland white guy who was able to benefit from the rally round the flag effect of Donald Trump attacking Canada, saying annexation, calling Trudeau governor, all of these things, which, while popular with me, at least when I was younger, growing up, and I wanted to be an American, I regretted the War of 1812. I wanted Canada to be part of the U.S. Now, definitely not. Let them manage their own decline. Maybe we can negotiate some sort of big, beautiful deal where we get Alberta and give them New England. But at this point, Canada is it's not doing well.
Yeah, I was very disappointed because I really like Pierre Poilievre. I think he's like a once in a generation leader that is charismatic and intelligent on policy
And he's
ideas,
the leader
like truly
of the Conservative
conservative.
Party.
Pierre Poilievre was the conservative candidate to be prime minister. He even lost his own seat. Though, I mean, to be fair, the conservatives did increase, as Ilya was saying. They gained many
They
seats.
gained more seats than the Liberals did.
That's right. The problem was, as he said, the consolidation around liberals, right? Canada is not a conservative country. It's very hard for the conservatives to get 50% of the vote and achieve a broad majority in parliament unless the left is divided. And the left was not divided in this election. And I also think that, in a way, it was Canadians trying to just slap Donald Trump in the face, right? By electing somebody who is the total opposite of him, like a technocrat central banker that is not charismatic and has never been in politics and all of that, versus the young, charismatic guy who Carney and the Liberals really worked hard to say that he's like Donald Trump, even though he's not.
Who was leading by 25 points as recently as December.
Yeah.
And the socialist leader, the New Democrat leader, Jagmeet Singh, tore up an agreement that he had with the Liberals, that his party was supporting Trudeau's Liberals for the whole entire term until September. At that point, they were no longer obligated. They could have brought down the government. But Singh said, even though his party at that point was poised to become the second largest party in parliament, and he would have been the opposition leader, he could not stomach Poilievre and the Conservatives having a majority government. And so instead, he went along with the decline of his own party, which no longer has, quote, official party status, meaning they don't get office space and funding and the right to ask questions. He lost his own seat as well. Lots of weird things going on.
I want to ask Renu's thoughts here because, you're the political scientist. I'm curious, what you make of that shift that it seems like the Canadians are moving to a two-party system, and then B, just sort of like, as Americans, how much should we care about Canadian politics? And there's like a concrete in the news question, but it's also just like, to my mind, Canada's sort of interesting as like a control America. It's like, what if we had remained kind of European as opposed to breaking off in 1776? But I'm curious if you buy that, and like, how much should I be how much should I as an American be invested in what's going on up there for like structural reasons?
Sure. I mean, I think how Ilya and Daniel are describing kind of the shift from Singh and the votes going kind of to the Liberal Party, the whole time I'm thinking about, what ended up happening with Trump and RFK. If you had Trump sort of make this deal, of course, RFK and whatnot, it's not the degree of significance of, sort of this party to, the exact equivalent of what's happening in Canada. But, there was that real fear. Are the votes from RFK going to go to Trump? Are they, going to go to VP Harris? And so I think that's an interesting comparison to make, and sort of, shows the shift of the two-party system in Canada, kind of mimicking what we saw a few months prior in the US. In general, though, to your point about like how much should we Americans care about our northern neighbor, I think a great deal. And, maybe people won't like me saying that, just as I think, maybe this is sort of the like squish diplomatic answer coming from me. We should care about just party systems throughout the globe, just in general. It's quite interesting. And you kind of even see this, happening in the UK and other areas, just, one dominant party, rising to power, other parties sort of coalescing around it. And so I think, due to increased polarization globally, and in a lot of the coverage about these past elections in Canada, from just people on the ground, you have the Times, the Economist, whatever on the ground, kind of interviewing voters. Everybody's sort of stressing polarization in Canada in a way in which we've heard in the US for the last 2 decades, I would say. And so for those reasons, I think, this election in Canada is interesting. There are echoes of what we just saw in the US. And I think, we should care simply because not for, not just with respect to issues of trade and whatnot, then maybe Daniel, I'm curious what your thoughts are on how that affected these elections. But simply because a lot of the polarization is a story that we've heard in the US for some time now.
I think also, think about this, the trade part. This is another example in world history where massive tariffs create political change in foreign countries. I mean, think about it. The 1930s Smoot-Hawley tariffs perhaps led to part of the rise in fascism in Europe, right? Now, nothing is as dramatic here, right? But it is one example of how or economic policies can have unexpected political consequences abroad that will affect us. Because think about it. Carney does not want to negotiate with the United States, does not want to cave into anything. Pierre Poilievre would have been much better for trade terms, would have been much better for energy because he wanted to deregulate energy, export more gas, more oil, which would have cheapened gas in the United States for all of us. So this is going to have literally a price for all of us. And it's also interesting if you see the election stats. Canada had kind of a similar phenomenon as the US in that there was racial depolarization, meaning immigrants, ethnic minorities in Canada shifted to the Conservative Party while white college graduates shifted to the Liberal Party. And in fact, that's part of why Pierre Poilievre lost. It was because of the white college grad vote. While he picked up all the minorities, all the immigrants, he increased his vote share. It was just really unfortunate because of the American dynamics that he lost.
Although there were some differences in the sense that the baby boomers really went heavily liberal, as opposed to the younger folks, and there's some superficial similarities to the U.S., but even among college educated, I think the younger folks generally went to Poilievre because there's this issue of housing affordability, jobs. I mean, their economic situation is much worse than even what Gen Z Americans complain about. But I have this kind of contradictory response to your question, Charles, because I find Canadian politics endlessly fascinating, as do some other people, like our fearless leader Raihan, Matt Iglesias. I mean, random commentators, pundits, public intellectuals in America. You never know who ideologically, because there's lots of stuff to drill down on. I mean, the highest two-vote share. Two-party share of the vote since 1958. Together, they got 85%. I mean, riding by the previous two elections, the Conservatives actually got a higher share of the vote than the Liberals, even though Trudeau got minority governments. You can really, nerd out on the political science. But getting back to the question of how much we as Americans should care, it kind of brings me back to that meme with Mad Men and John Hamm in the elevator, where the other guy's like saying, I hate you, whatever, and he's like, John Hamm's like, I don't think about you. It matters somewhat on trade, but I think it's unfortunate. It's what have you. But at the end of the day, there are more people in California, and Texas is about to, I think, approach Canada's population as well.
Ilya, come on. This is the largest unprotected border in the world. It's the longest continuous land border in the planet between two countries. It's Canada-U.S. border. There is no wall. There is no
Not
military.
When Tom Homan's
It's a great thing. No, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. We need to keep it that way.
I've been calling for building the wall for a long time.
No.
They're sending crime, they're sending drugs, and some I assume are good people. No, I mean, in some so part of the angle here, but I want to take us out, but part of the angle here, to Daniel's point, is that I sort of look at Poilievre and I go, like, he's tough on crime, he's tough on drugs, he wants to build lots of housing, he wants to deregulate, he wants abundance. He's sort of like what I think of like as a social conservatism of normalcy, which is like, I am for normal people and I'm against people who hate normal people. And so like in many ways, he's an MI conservative. And so I was cheering for him on that front, right? And he's picking up the MI constituency, like, right-wing recent immigrants. That's an MI constituency.
And there's, of course, he's known to a lot of Americans to the extent that he's known by that one viral video of him eating an apple while a clueless reporter asks him things, then he just completely shuts him down. So there was, I saw on X last night, some Canadian commentator said that Mark Carney needs to now unite the nation by giving his first speech in Parliament while eating an apple.
Yeah, all I'm saying is, Pierre Poilievre, if you're listening, we'd love to talk to you at a senior fellowship. Uh, no, I can't make that offer.
Or interview you, or
I'd love to
host-
interview him.
yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know.
He's
come on,
not
come on,
leaving
have
actually,
lots.
even though he lost his seat. This is another. I mean, this is fascinating stuff. So only MPs, members of Parliament, can live in the residence that's given to the official leader of the opposition. So he temporarily has to move out of his house and then win a special election, which is called a by-election. This is what they do. He hasn't resigned the leadership of the Conservatives. He's not going to be pushed out. He's still very popular. So they're going to
right.
drop him into some other safe seat somewhere to run for a by-election like in a month or so, and then he gets to move back into his
That
house.
is so nice of them.
That's crazy. All right. So I want to. Ilya alluded to this, but obviously the president would like to make Canada the 51st state for some reason. It's really not clear why or if he actually believes this. Most Canadians are quite resistant, but some
Team
are.
USA in hockey would be unbeatable.
We already are. That most Canadians are not that interested, but there are a couple of provinces who might be a little open to it: Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan. So here's my
For the
question.
oil.
Let's say we did a trade. Which U.S. state would you trade for which Canadian province? Daniel, what's your take?
Okay. So for geographic beauty, we need to have bordering states, I guess. So obviously give them Vermont. That's the first one bordering Canada to give them. Bernie Sanders is out. Can you imagine? I mean, we could just give Vermont and not get anything back.
But what about our strategic? What about
and
our
then-
strategic maple syrup reserve?
We'll have plenty of maple syrup from Alberta and from Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Those are good. And then maybe we can give them, Minnesota, Washington State. And the map would still look good. America would be much larger. It would have so much more oil that could be exploited. And then all the pipelines, there would be no problem with the Keystone XL pipeline because it's not an international border anymore. The pipelines would get built.
All right, Renu, where are you at on making the great swap?
I don't know if I can think of a state to eliminate, but I would, and I don't, this is definitely not an area of Canada that would, in my mind, be open to becoming a part of the US. But I love Quebec. I love everything about Quebec. I was in
the worst part,
You're the
Renu.
only
I
one.
know, but let me
That's the
explain
most left
why.
wing.
I know, but it's just so beautiful. It's just so Montreal. I mean, come on. I was in Montreal recently, and I just thought a lot of crazy things were happening.
In addition to empuja dos para español, you want appuie le trois pour le français.
Some I'm
European
not a
America
monarchist,
there.
but add some European pizzazz.
It is a very pretty place, and the unfortunate problem is that it's filled with Quebecois. So they have that working.
Nice
against
place
them.
to visit.
Yeah.
I recommend the old city of Quebec. Very romantic. Nice to have a cocktail
I'm
on a
actually
porch in the
going in
summer.
September, Ilya. I'm actually
Good.
going. I'm taking
We all love it.
a yacht cruise from New York City all the
Yeah,
way
but
up to Montreal. and we're stepping in Quebec
no need
City.
to own that.
That's
All
true.
right, Ilya, what's your trade?
Well, I already gave it. You
All right.
take Alberta is the key. I mean, Saskatchewan, Manitoba would be fine. It would be great. I'll take it. But Alberta is the key. That's where a much greater population center. In addition to the oil, Saskatchewan brings wheat if we need that. But anyway, just New England. Just I'm sorry, New Hampshire. I'm sorry, other people, whatever. But just to make it contiguous.
New Hampshire, Ilya, you're giving up New Hampshire. The live free or
Sacrifices
die
have
state.
to be made, and I think just have that whole contiguous block. I mean, I'd keep Maine, but then you need a land bridge to New York, and that would be tough. So,
All right, I will be giving up most of the Pacific Northwest. They can have Washington. They can have Oregon. We will be taking the prairie provinces. They
so
can have
reversing James Knox Polk's
Yeah.
54-40 or fight.
Yes, precisely. But look, Washington State and Oregon are basically extensions of British Columbia already. They're all just completely drugs are legal in all three jurisdictions. So it's a crazy place to begin with. They gotta
Of
go.
course, that's the issue you brought up.
That's how I'm thinking about it. All right. Before we go, I want to ask everyone to sound off. Our friends at the New York Post have a funny report out yesterday that Zoomers are now, and this is the phrase that they use, barebacking on their way to work, which that
Charles,
comment on
this is a family program.
No, it means staring at other riders on public transit, like sitting there, staring off into space, rather than looking at their phones or looking at books as, I guess, a form of protest, as a way to. I don't. This may be entirely fake.
I've actually heard of this trend on flights, which is even worse.
Well, that's raw dogging, which is
Okay.
different. All I know.
Kids these
New York
days.
Post told me it's real.
Wait. I just need to understand. It means how can you stare at someone in the airplane?
No, you don't do
you're
any
just,
headphones.
you're just like staring at the back of the seat, and you're just like with your thoughts,
Without
and that's
anything.
it. And
Without
apparently,
no
you
headphones.
refuse the beverage service as well. I mean, this is like some sort of monastical like asceticism or something.
So here's my question: assuming that you do not engage in these practices on your way to work, what do you do to keep yourself entertained on your commute to get into the office, whether it's on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis? Otherwise, Renu, why don't we start with you? What do you do to stay entertained on public transit?
I try to have a book with me. I like to read, but also if I am staring at people, on a lot of public transportation systems, you're not technically supposed to bring non-service dogs, but that doesn't stop anybody. You see people with their dogs in their backpacks and baby strollers. And I mean, I just love it. I just love it.
Fair. Daniel?
I have headphones. Sometimes I try to sleep or rest if it's very early. Usually, honestly, just headphones and music. That's what I do. And people might not know this, but I listen, especially if it's on my way to work and motivation, or on my way to the gym, I just put on heavy metal, Sabaton, which is a Swedish metal band that only sings about wars and different armed conflicts.
Not Quebecois folk music.
No, I do listen to country music.
All right, Ilya, what do you listen to on your travels?
Yeah, well, travels is the way to put it, because my commute as such is walking down the stairs from my bedroom to my study. And well, sometimes my kids are trying to get up. I mean, the traffic can be hectic, but I do travel a fair bit. I live between Reagan and Dulles airports, and I visit those airports more than I cross the River Styx into the District of Columbia, where I don't have an office. But what I tend to do is I subscribe to a lot of magazines and journals, and I read all of them on my trips. I don't tend to read them at home.
Fair. I listen to podcasts, which is funny. I'm the only one who listens to podcasts. And obviously I listen to the City Journal podcast, like all of you listeners out there. On that note, that is about all the time that we have today. So thank you, as always, to our panelists. Thank you to our producer, Isabella Reggi, as always. Listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, ring the bell on your favorite platforms, YouTube or otherwise. Even if you didn't like the episode, you can still do all of those things. It's fine.
And Charles, before you completely close this, given the amount of Canadian content in this podcast, it might qualify for playing on Canadian radio, because there are regulations of the percentage of Canadian. In fact, there's for music, there's a 4-pronged test. It's like singer, producer, writer, and something else. And two of the four have to be Canadian to qualify towards the quota that you have to fill every day of Canadian content.
This is why there's so much Canadian country music.
Amazing government regulations.
Well, no, it's Western. There are two
why
types of
we
music,
have
right?
government.
Country and Western. So Canada does the Western part from Alberta again.
If you're a Canadian listener, you're also free to like, subscribe, and comment. And if the CBC would like to rebroadcast us, I'm happy to have that conversation. Listeners, also Canadian, American, or otherwise, if you'd like to leave us comments, questions, please do so down below on our YouTube channel. We might even answer some of them, assuming they're not. The last time I did this, everyone was just very complimentary at Heather McDonald, which makes sense because she's great. Until next time, you've been listening to the City Journal podcast. I hope you'll join us again soon.